Welcome to Raising Risky Kids, part of Risky Kids Online. This is where we talk all about risky play science and the ways that we can help kids become the greatest versions of themselves, not just later on as adults, but also in the here and now, making sure that they experience their childhood, but at the same time that they're challenged and they have lots of great experiences. In today's talk, we're going to be working with Sian, Chambers-Vallance. She's going to be talking with us on behalf of Building Better Brains Australia, which is her and her partner, Tony Vallance. Tony won Educator of the Year in 2019, and Sian is a wonderful play therapist. And they work to upskill educators and parents on the ways that we can use play and play therapy to help reduce trauma or prevent trauma. And they have an amazing set of online workshops that everyone should check out. So let's jump into it now.
Excellent. Okay, good. I think we're there. So I've already pre-filmed a little introduction for us, but if you would like to introduce yourself, and I'll introduce myself because we've got a bit of a mix of people who are watching, and we will have a mix of people watching at home. So take it away.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, Richard. My name is Sian Chambers-Vallance, and I am from Building Better Brains Australia. And what we do is we work with parents, with educators, with mental health professionals, and we do a lot of training and consultancy to really help them understand brain and behaviour, understand trauma and the effects of what we call toxic stress, which is actually currently kind of what most of us are going through right now, how this actually plays out and affects our ability to regulate our nervous systems and our children's ability to regulate their nervous systems, and that then plays out in their behavioural symptoms that a lot of us will be seeing right now, and then ways we can actually help them. And I always start with, particularly with parents and with teachers, we actually have to learn to understand ourselves first and attach our own oxygen masks so that we can then also help the children in our care. So if we can't do the self-resourcing, we really don't have the capacity to do all the work with our kids as well, because it does take a lot of work. As you know, Richard, and both of us work intimately with kids in that way as well. So I run a private practice specialising in play therapy and creative arts counselling, which is pretty awesome because I get to, like you, I get to play for a job, and I get to teach people how to play and to connect and process through play and build cognitive flexibility, which is really our ability to think in different ways, to approach things in different ways, to problem solve, to use creativity, to help us build resiliency, really, which is pretty much the work that you do, but in a different format. I mean, you do it, I guess, in that physical way, and then in the programs that you teaching that mental side of it, and I do it in the playroom, and as a therapist, really working with families to help their understanding and help them learn how to do this at home with their own children, and then with children themselves directly. Yeah. So it's been a pretty amazing time at the moment, watching my own children play and the kind of themes that I'm seeing, and watching my clients play and the kind of themes that I'm seeing, and they're all the same themes, which is not surprising, because once we actually start to understand the science of play and the language of play, we can actually interpret what we're seeing and actually value it more. The problem is, as you probably would agree, as a society, we've really lost our way in not understanding or valuing the role of play. And play has always been absolutely essential throughout our evolutionary history as human beings to actually grow what we call pro-social brains, which is our ability to exist in a positive way socially with each other, because we are social animals. Human beings are social animals. A third of our brain is programmed for connection, which is why this period of time with COVID is actually such a challenge for so many people and for the mental health of so many people, because it goes against what we're actually being told to do, which is actually to connect and to attach to other human beings for our survival.
Yeah,
so that's a little bit about me. I mean, there's lots more I could tell you, but
that was a much better introduction. I was like, we're going to be talking with Sian, and this is what she does. But I think that's a really great example. One of the things there's two things that I like talking about, which I think you and I have talked about before. It's that as much as play is something that used to happen naturally and we have lost it, one of my approaches is that we also now understand so much more about it, that the deliberate and intentional application of it can be so much more powerful than the natural way that it used to occur. We understand it so much more intimately now that we can really harness it, and that's, I think, what both of our programs do really well. Us specifically is just one of those pieces of the puzzle, really looking at the movement side of things, but actually saying, okay, well, if this stuff used to be really important in the past, but we understand it so much better, yes, it's very important for us to get back that natural side of things, but then let's not rest on our laurels. Let's take it up to that next step and figure out exactly how we can put the reins on it and get the most out of it at all times.
Absolutely, and I feel like I think there's another big missing bit of the puzzle there, which is, yes, we have all this amazing scientific evidence to prove the value of play now, which is fantastic language that once we understand it, I see it as our responsibility to become advocates for our children, to the systems that they have to operate in, which a lot of the time are not child-centered and not play-based systems, and really explain why developmentally play has to be the foundation of how our children learn, because it's how our brains process and learn and recall and remember and stay regulated. This is the thing, it's a whole brain body experience, and I guess so many of the kids that I see, will come in with labels and funded, but it's interesting, a lot of those kids are thriving with home learning. Because we have to ask ourselves, and I already know this because this is my focus is to focus on the human being beyond the label, and not to see the label as a limitation, not to work from that behaviourist model, to work from the human-centered model, to go, okay, well, if I can teach you to be a little bit more cognitively flexible and look at things in a more creative, play-based way, then you're going to build a healthier brain system, which means that you're going to be able to deal with your stress, with your emotions, with your ability to regulate yourself, which then plays out in everything, in your way to handle relationships and learning and everything like that. So it's been interesting to see a lot of these kids that really struggle with sensory overload, with aggression, with things like this at school, are doing really well in the home environment, and that's wonderful to see. So back to my point, the missing bit of the jigsaw, I think, is we have all the science, we have all the evidence, we see this play out in our everyday lives in people like us that work as professionals in this area. However, I still feel like it's not common knowledge. Play in terms of our society still is very much dismissed. It is not valued. It's not understood, particularly within the systems, in our parenting and educational systems that our children spend most of the time in. And again, it's not the fault of those people. This isn't a blame thing. It's to do with how they were raised as well in a society that really dismissed and misunderstood play. But there's some pretty worrying stats out there, and like the American Pediatric Association has come out recently actually saying we need to start prescribing play to children. I mean, for me, that's like heartbreaking, that we actually have to get a doctor's certificate to say your child needs to play for an hour or two per day because we know that that's what they need for their mental health, because it's not happening. So I feel there's still so far to go. So yes, you and I in our professional lives can do the work with the children and educate kind of the people in our care about that power and the value of play. But I think that next bit is we then need to tackle the more systemic work that has to be done. Which is advocating, being the voice for the children who are essentially voiceless in our society, and saying this is developmentally the way we need to go.
And also very much embedding ourselves in those, I think those structural parts of the world. So you already do so much work with educators and being able to get in with them. And the one big thing, it's come to me a couple of times, our program called Risky Kids, I immediately get a little bit of pushback from some of the more, maybe I don't want to say like archaic thinking, but just more risk averse teachers who say, oh, but you know, I'm worried that the kids will take a risk and then they'll get hurt, and then they will, you know, we'll get blamed, and it's
then they'll sue us. Then they'll sue us.
And so it's about being able to say, okay, well, what's more, let's even just examine for a second, what's more likely in terms of litigation. If you take some kids out to a playground, you teach them the skills they need to be able to engage with it. You teach them how to regulate their fear and their emotion and listen to their minds when their bodies and their minds are telling, oh, maybe we're not ready for this yet, let's try something smaller. And then something goes wrong, you can at least turn around and say, okay, well, that's just an accident, and these things happen. Whereas when we have a huge generation of kids who have been stopped from doing this, it's like, okay, well, we're going to stop them from taking any risks. Only that's the real time when if something goes wrong, you say, we have no idea why it went wrong because we haven't even tried to help these kids. And so talking to the teachers and helping them try and just reframe things. So we talk at Risk Kids a lot about risk intelligence. We're not talking about teaching kids to take risks. We're teaching kids how to understand risk. But it does have to occur through that experiential learning. They've got to play. They've got to go out. They've got to engage with other kids. They've got to take risks and listen to themselves and understand how it all works before they can really actually start living their lives the way that we want. And so that's why I like getting in with teachers, getting in with like parents. It's amazing that we've obviously got a handful of parents on now watching, which is great. But
it's awesome. Hi.
And the next step for me is like, okay, teachers, which you're already doing, the government as well, obviously making sure that they get on board. I've been doing lots of research lately and really learning a lot more than I thought I ever would about sport, because I don't get into sport that much, but understanding that there's really different stages, and right now the response, especially from government organisations and from all the big bodies, is like sport is the be all and end all, and now they're all starting to go, oh, okay, maybe there's a lot that needs to happen before we get to sport. I'm like, sport is great, but it's kind of the result of what we want to achieve. It's not the way that we achieve it. So, but before we're going to go on so many tangents, I actually really want to cover.
This is Richard and I like all the time, every time we talk.
It's like, I read this thing, but I actually had two really specific things I wanted to work with today. And it's very much, I think, and because you've been doing so much work with kids online, you will have some really cool info on this. The first one I wanted to start touching base with, specifically looking at how to help parents get kids to engage and differentiate between the positive online content versus the normal online content. It came up because I experienced a few conversations where parents were having a lot of difficulty getting their kids to engage with. It's like, oh, they won't get on the Zoom, they won't do the classes. But then at the same time, I'm also hearing that these kids will spend, 4 or 5 hours a day playing video games. So it's not the device that we have the issue with, it's communication about the structures around that. So I really wanted to work on and see what strategies you would suggest or that you've seen work well, and it will be different for every parent and every family, but just some really cool guidelines or some good suggestions in terms of how to get kids to engage with that positive online content.
So it's a little bit of a bigger question, I guess, for me. So
Step back as far as you need.
So I think that part of this needs to be, look, in my ideal world, I would see that there's an opportunity for incredible changes to actually come out of this period of time. That we could return. So let's not even talk about it returning, but we could move to potentially a different model if we can take the lessons of this period on board and start to actually reflect on the things that work and the things that don't work, and become advocates for our children in the systems that for a lot of them do not work, right? So the first week, and my boys' school's, really progressive. I do a lot of work with them, so that, they're doing some amazing work. But they, I rang them after the first week and I said, you need to halve your workload right now. It is way too much. And I'd say, and then you'll probably need to halve it again. This is, right, what we fundamentally have to understand, because we're so used to working in silos rather than actually looking at the bigger picture, is that we are expecting our children to learn, right, and expecting teachers to teach based on this old kind of conditioned system within the middle of a trauma event, within the middle of a worldwide epidemic, like nothing has changed. Now, this is just insane, right? Because it's impossible. Some children, and I don't know many, it may be working well for, okay? And like I said, with a couple of my kids that really struggle in the classroom, it's working well because guess what? They have one-on-one attuned attention. They have a caregiver who's using body-based, engaging, creative, practical, contextual learning strategies with them within their home. And wow, isn't that amazing that they can learn so effectively in that way, because that's how our brains learn, right? But put them in a classroom devoid of those things and very disconnected a lot of the time with the curriculum, which, gosh, I saw some of the expectations coming out for my 6-year-old, and and again, this is a really progressive school that's doing some amazing things. And I was like, oh my God, I want to homeschool my children. This is so not appropriate developmentally. And then what happens in this process is that the child, and I mean, lucky my younger child's pretty switched on, but that's not necessarily the norm, but even the language that they're expected to absorb as a 6-year-old and use and understand is like, I think it's like basically training a seal, right? Yes, they can use a language. It doesn't mean they have a context to the language or a depth or an understanding of the language. The whole purpose in teaching them this language is so that they can sit NAP planning in grade 3. And I'm just like, this is crazy, right? So I wrote them a whole article, which I'm happy to share with your parent community as well, on the power of play and play-based learning, and how in this time we need to, and look, it's hard. It's such a struggle for teachers. I mean, as you know, my husband's a teacher as well, and I'm surrounded by teachers. Like, their workload's been just crazy, and they're doing the best they can based on what they feel they have to deliver in the systems and try and change it all overnight. So it's not easy for anyone. And then parents are trying to hold everything up as well, which is not easy for them. Everyone's really struggling. However, what's happening is that when they start to, so I've kind of fed this back to the school, and then they started to set practical contextual maths, like, hey, go and bake with your parents this week and look at all the maths that's used in cooking. I want you to cook cookies, and I want you to measure things, and I want you to add together your measurements, and I want you to weigh things, and I want you to explore this. And so it's amazing. And suddenly the kids were like, oh, do we get to do more maths today? They've started giving them card games, different maths card games that they can use, and they love it. And tick, that's our maths. So what we feel our kids have to be learning is actually not essential, right? It's teaching them to a test, which really I don't believe they should be sitting anyway, because it really just serves the school, but it doesn't serve the child, right? So it's not a child-centered, it's not developmentally appropriate. So I guess the more that we can actually advocate to and feedback in a positive way to our children's teachers, to the school, the better. Share my article that gives lots and lots of practical, contextual ways that the children can be learning at home, rather than here's another worksheet or watch this video. And it's totally disconnected. It doesn't surprise me that a lot of these kids don't want to connect through another screen. They can zone out through a screen, right? As you were saying, they can spend hours playing games because they're getting these nice dopamine hits, and that's their relationship with the screen. But having to make their learning happen through a screen, connect to these people that they're seeing but can't really connect to, actually makes them just feel more sad and more stressed about the fact they can't connect with them. And if you look at it, it's hard for us adults to conceptually understand what has happened in our lives right now and where we're at, because we have no template, okay, to actually process, to fully process what's going on. For our kids, their little lives have been blown up overnight. So suddenly that, my child is heartbroken that he can't see his friends. He's dreaming about He wakes up and he dreams about playing with his friends, and he says, I feel so sad in the morning because I can't play with them. And then our kids have got all these major emotions going on. They're really stressed. They're seeing the adults around them really stressed out and dysregulated. And we know that stress affects the brain. Stress literally shuts down the top parts of the brain, which is the thinking brain. It puts us back in our very basic animal reptilian brain systems, which are all about fear and safety and connection. And big emotions, and it puts us back there, and it makes it really hard for us to focus, for us to regulate ourselves, and for us to learn. So I think we need to massively lower our expectations of the amount that we're trying to shove into our kids right now, and actually work from a compassionate, human-centered, trauma-informed, brain-based understanding and model to support them through what
I got two Cliff Notes versions for that. First one, lower expectations for what kids are supposed to be achieving right now. Second one, share your article with their schools to hopefully help redirect. But also, I think that you were talking very much about that idea of advocacy and involvement.
Be a voice for your child.
Absolutely. And I think that some parents sometimes feel like teachers are the experts, or that they have to be listened to. It's like no one is going to be more of an expert in your child than you. And so if your kid's struggling, like listen to your instincts and communicate. And that's the other thing.
Right.
Teachers are not there to be prescriptive. As much as you may feel like, they're doing the best that they can do, they will always, I think, appreciate more information, so long as it comes from that side of things, where it's a collaborative approach. Hey,
that's what I was going to say.
Little Timmy or little Tammy is struggling with this. What are some different approaches? I read XYZ article. One thing that you shared the other day, which I've already it's just something which I noticed even today, was kids turning off their screens during Zoom. So in things like that, and just letting them do that, because we're in week 6 now. Every Saturday we do a catch up with a bunch of our future leaders, who are they're the kids who are obviously doing leadership roles within the Risky Kids things. You can tell, the first 3 weeks they were like, this is cool, this is exciting. They're just tired now. They're tired.
Everyone's
doing the best
tired.
they can, and so we're letting their involvement and their presence is what we appreciate, and that's what we make sure we just let them know we're happy to see them. They can participate if they want to. They don't have to, but I've seen kids just turn off their screens every now and then, and I'm like, it's not something we need to worry about. So I think those are actually two really strong or 3 or 4 really strong takeaways for that.
Also understanding, like I said, understanding we are parenting and educating and functioning in the middle of a worldwide epidemic. Okay. Right. So this is, as I'd said before, this is a worldwide trauma event. Trauma, we often think of trauma as these extreme things that happen. And so cognitively we might go, yeah, but I'm safe in my house, and I have food, and I have toilet paper, and I have, all of these fundamental things. However, our nervous systems, right, our animal parts of our brain, our lower parts of our brain, because our lives have kind of been imploded, our rituals as we know them, we're getting a lot of fear signals from our environment. We can't connect in the same way, which is how we actually regulate ourselves, by connecting to other people, by co-regulating, it's called. Because we can't do all of this processing and have a lot of that positive touch, which also helps bring down our stress responses. It actually creates a trauma event for ourselves. And I noticed that, you were saying, how do we avoid trauma? So I think we can rephrase that question. We can't avoid trauma. We're all in the middle of the trauma. Okay. Let's just accept that. We are all going through a trauma toxic stress event right now. At the moment, we are in the holding period, and talking to a lot of therapists worldwide that I'm part of, a lot of groups, one of the leading trauma therapists basically said to us, you think you're tired now, you have to pull back, because this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. We are in the holding period. We are still in the middle of everything, right? It will be the other side that the wheels fall off, right?
Yes.
So this is Yeah, so we need to know this. So bearing this in mind, and parents, me as a parent goes, oh my God, how much more capacity do I have? That's where this period of time is actually a moment where we go, do you know what? If we're not doing self-care, if we're not prioritizing moments of self-care, if we're not carving those out for ourselves, right, we cannot hold this. We cannot sustain this. This is the time for us to learn these fundamental skills that are the basis of everything. Because trauma essentially just means anything that is perceived, that is the important word, perceived as a threat by our nervous systems, putting us in what we call a hyper-aroused state, which is a high cortisol. So that's the stress hormone in the brain that I was talking about. It shuts down the thinking brain, and the body pumps adrenaline, which is why we need to move so much. Right? It's why you need to keep moving, keep our kids moving, get them to work for maybe 15, 20 minutes and then get up and move, to basically keep this cortisol and this adrenaline at a manageable level in the body. Otherwise, you're definitely going to be seeing it in lots of behavioral symptoms.
Yes, good. And what I was really happy about was you said that idea of helping to avoid trauma. My question was actually, how do we avoid creating more trauma? So that's one of the things I think that is, and it of course is very connected to everything we've already been talking about. But this idea, what are some key things we really want to make sure that we're avoiding doing, which are going to heap on to something? Because like you said, trauma is happening. We're not getting away from that.
That's right.
What are the really core things that we want to avoid that might be triggered in a time like this from us, or that we might have a tendency to potentially do in a situation like this ourselves, either as parents or as people who are interacting with kids, even if it's just via Zoom? What are the things that we can avoid doing? So that's my question for you.
Great question. I would say, can we flip the question and make it more of a strengths-based? Yeah, okay. So because I'll say, let's talk about the things that we can do, because all that other stuff is going to be coming up for us. The triggers are coming up for us, as I've been saying to a lot of my clients, and and me too. And I've got pretty good skills because this is what I teach and practice myself. But still, my days are going to go like this, right? I'm going to have my exhausted periods, and I'm going to have my quite calm, excited periods, and I'll have my sad periods of disconnection. I'll have my periods of frustration, and accepting that this is probably step one.
Love it.
Right? Sitting with, and we talk about this a lot in trauma work, learning to sit with whatever's going on, not escape it, not avoid it, sit with, but grow capacity to sit with, is actually the foundation of everything. Because that's what grows what we call our window of tolerance to stress. So we go from being hair trigger response to stress to having a little bit more in the tank before we fire up like a volcano, or whatever our pattern is that we happen to do when we're stressed. So I'd be saying growing our capacity to sit with whatever's going on and reflect upon what's going on. We can do that through self-care. We can do that through mindfulness, there's massive amounts of evidence now on, which is really how we train our brains to become more regulated and more calm, and be able to kind of step back and see the bigger picture rather than just kind of being in the storm of reactivity all the time. So daily mindfulness. And look, I'm a parent as well, juggling a million different things, clients and business and everything. I know how hard it is to have all those balls in the air. I can't sit down for like half an hour, 40 minutes and meditate, but I can take mindful moments. So I can, before I get up in the morning, do 5 or 10 minutes of a body scan meditation. And there's heaps of free resources on YouTube. If you, I'm sure Rich can share the links to, we've actually created a parent and educator support group with lots and lots of fantastic resources. I actually did a whole series, a video series and a manual that comes with it. It's all free on self-care for parents. So I've got lots of fantastic feedback about that. So Richard can give you the links to that so you can start playing around with those different ideas and activities. So you can do that. And then kind of just having honest conversations with our kids. It's the same thing. If our child is saying, I'm feeling really sad that I'm not seeing my friends, we don't have to shut that down. right? We can sit with that feeling, and that's okay. We don't have to rescue them from that feeling. That's the same as, physically. If we translate that physically or emotionally, we don't have to rescue them from that situation. That's not how they learn. You build resiliency by being validated and seen and having a attuned, connected relationship with you, with whatever you are experiencing. So if I'm saying I'm feeling really sad, my response could be to validate that and to say, I can see how sad you're feeling about missing your friends. It must be really tough right now. Shut my mouth. Sit with this human being in front of me telling me this. Do you need a hug? I know this is hard. I don't know when it's going to end either. It's hard for mummy sometimes too. I feel overwhelmed, and I really miss the people in my life too. Right? I'm not saving you from this feeling, but I'm sitting with you in this feeling so that you don't feel alone. Now that's really important. That grows emotional intelligence. It grows whole brain integration, which is the very definition of a healthy brain, which means that we have these connections from our left to our right brain and right to left, which is our big emotions, and then our verbalization of those emotions. So we're actually teaching them emotional language to be able to express themselves rather than have to show it in behavior. But we need to teach this explicitly, right? And it starts with how we parent.
I really like you always say, be the guide on the side. And that's something I always reflect the parents. I always say, they're like, oh, how do I help my kids through these challenges or whatever it might be. Usually we're talking about physical ones. So we're talking about them navigating, being able to achieve or overcome things. And I always just say, my friend Sian from Building Better Brains says that we have to be the guide on the side. That's one of the most important. I really like that idea of not having to rescue kids. To me, that's the kind of pinnacle of everything we do. It's like let kids experience these things, because that's the only way they're going to learn how to handle them.
That's right.
And I don't want to say like what they're going through isn't a big deal, but there's probably going to be things bigger later, well, maybe not bigger than this, but later in their life there will be other challenges, and you want them to have that skill set. And it could be that working with them on something small now is what helps them get through something big later on.
It's really that it starts young, right? If we can teach our kids from a young age, and even if you haven't been able to, right, because you probably weren't parented with a parent that had those attuned skills, and this is what happens, it gets passed down from generation to generation. But even if you have older kids, you can still start doing this now, right? It's never too late, because we have what's called brain plasticity. So it means that we can, until the day we die, we can build these new neural pathways, these new communication highways in our brain around certain behaviors and skills, which is a fantastic thing, right? That's why we do what we do. Otherwise people wouldn't learn, would they, right? So it gives us hope. So it's very, very important to be able to not abandon our kids to their emotions, but so let them know that we're there, ask them what they need from us, right? But don't leap in and save them, because if we leap in and save them every time, do you know what we're teaching them as a message? We're saying, you don't have capacity to do this yourself, right? So I don't trust you. I don't trust, I don't believe in you that you actually can climb up this tree, or that you can handle these big emotions, or that you know how to actually process this through the natural language of children, which is play. Or, you're actually giving them those messages if you're constantly leaping in and kind of taking over for them. And that's the opposite of what we all want as parents, isn't it? It's just that we need to flip the way we do it a little bit more.
And also I think it's a lot of hard work. I couldn't imagine saving somebody from every single problem in their life and having that constant emotional labor in yourself that I have to be looking after myself and this person. I'm like, it's okay to just step back. Now, we're nearly
You still have to look after them. You still have to look after them. It actually, I have to tell you though, Richard, when you do first start working in this way, it is exhausting, because having and as a therapist, like having to sit in someone's space 100% attuned to them, it takes a lot of focus and energy, right, to do that.
Yeah.
It's easier to kind of flit around the edges, but to actually be there fully attuned with someone means Yes, actively there, because two things have to be happening, and it requires actually quite high emotional intelligence, because you have to know what's going on with yourself and regulate yourself. You have to be able to sense what's going on for the other person and read what's going on for the other person and try and be the anchor to regulate them. I call it being the lighthouse in the storm, right? For our children, when they're showing us their big, extreme emotions sometimes in the storm, then our job is to work out how to be the lighthouse for them and to bring them back to shore.
I love it. And look, we're just about out of time, so we might end on that one. But I thought if any of our parents potentially had questions, what we might do is we might sign out, and then anybody who wants to ask questions, we'll sign back in after a minute or two. Me and Sian can grab a drink and catch our breaths, and then we'll be back. But I really want to thank you so much for jumping on board today. I want to do way more of these with you. I'm so excited that we got a chance to chat.
Yay. And as always, it's just the tip of the iceberg with our conversations. There's always so much more to talk about. So
I will
thank you
share
for
all
having
of the
me.
links, I promise.
No, beautiful. That sounds great. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See you in a second if you've got questions.
Yep, bye.